I can only accept this.
Riley Lloyd asked a dangerous stranger on a park bench for a hug. She had just found out her dad had 6 months to live. Maurizio Giuliani hadn't hugged anyone in 20 years. Head of the Italian mob, hands stained with blood, heart frozen since the day his mother died. But something about her broke him. He offered her a home, protection, changed piece by piece, until the day she opened the wrong door, saw the basement, the blood, the gun in his hand. You kill people? She should have run, but when the FBI offered immunity in exchange for betraying him, Riley made the most dangerous choice of all. She stayed, and one desperate hug turned into a war against the entire world. Let me tell you something. If he looked at you and said your name, would you have the courage to answer? Chapter 1: The Hug That Changed Everything.
Just hold me.
6 months. The words still echoed in my head like a gunshot that never stops reverberating. 6 months was all my father had left, all that remained of the only family I had, all that stood between me and the moment my world would completely fall apart. The doctor had said it in that professional, detached voice, as if he were telling me about the weather or traffic, not about the end of the life of the man who raised me on his own, who taught me to laugh even when everything seemed impossible. Terminal cancer, no cure, no hope, just 6 months of slow, painful goodbyes. I don't remember leaving the hospital. My body moved on autopilot, an emotional zombie walking through streets that suddenly felt foreign, full of people living normal lives while mine shattered into pieces so small I didn't know how to put them back together. Tears ran down silently, warm against my cold face, and I didn't even try to wipe them away, because what was the point? What did any of it matter now? I found a bench in some random park. I sat down, and that's when I completely fell apart. The sobs came hard and violent, tearing through my throat, shaking my entire body like I was a rag doll in the hands of a furious child. I cried out loud, not caring who walked by, not caring about anything except the pain that felt like it was swallowing me whole. That's when I felt someone stop in front of me. I looked up with red, swollen eyes and saw a man. Tall, broad-shouldered beneath a dark coat that concealed whatever lay underneath, with a face that looked carved from Italian marble, all sharp angles and a tight jaw. But it was his eyes that held me, dark as the deepest night, cold in a way that should have scared me, but somehow made me stop crying for a second. "You okay?" His voice was low, raspy, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. And the question was ridiculous. Obviously I wasn't okay, but something about the way he asked it, like he genuinely didn't know what to say, but felt like he had to say something, made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. "No," the word came out broken, painfully honest. "I'm not." A pause, a shaky breath, and then, without thinking, without filtering, just too desperate to care about how absurd it was, I said, "Can you hug me? Just for a second? Please." He froze, completely, as if I'd asked for something impossible, something that defied all laws of physics and reason. His eyes widened, barely, the only expression that crossed that stone-cold face, and I saw something there, something that looked like shock mixed with something else I couldn't decode. He started, but couldn't finish, because I had already stood up, because I had already thrown myself at him, because I needed it, with an urgency that went beyond logic, to feel like I wasn't completely alone in this cruel world that had just ripped half my heart away. My arms wrapped around him, my face buried into his chest, and I sobbed again, loud and uncontrolled, feeling the fabric of his coat absorb my tears. He went rigid, completely rigid. His arms hovered in the air for a moment, as if he didn't know where to put them, as if touching another person was a foreign language he had forgotten how to speak. And for one horrible second, I thought I had made a massive mistake, that I had invaded the space of a stranger who probably thought I was out of my mind. But then, slowly, almost hesitantly, his arms came down and wrapped around me and held on. And something about the way he did it, the way his muscles relaxed, just barely, even as the rest of him stayed tense, made me cry even harder, because it was exactly what I needed. "Thank you," I whispered between sobs, my voice muffled against him. I just needed to feel like I'm not alone. There was a pause, a long one, and then, in a voice that was strangely soft, so different from the initial coldness that it almost seemed like someone else, he said, "You're not." We stayed like that. I don't know for how long. 5 minutes? 10? The world could have ended around us and I wouldn't have noticed. Because for the first time since I walked out of that doctor's office, I could breathe. His scent wrapped around me, something woody and masculine with a hint of danger I couldn't name. And the warmth of his body against mine felt like the only thing keeping me on my feet. Finally, I pulled back, slowly, reluctantly, and when I looked at him again, there was something different in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before, a kind of confusion mixed with something else that made my stomach clench in a strange way. Sorry, the words came out embarrassed, my cheeks flushing warm even through the tears. I just hugged a complete stranger. That's really weird. It is, he agreed, but there was something at the corner of his mouth, not exactly a smile, but almost. It's okay though. I tried to smile back and failed miserably. I just found out my dad is going to die. 6 months. And I don't know what to do. Something crossed his face in that moment, something dark and painful that passed too quickly for me to identify. But when he spoke again, there was an understanding in his voice that hadn't been there before. Come on, he said, and it wasn't a request. I'll take you to get coffee, or something stronger. You need to sit down. Process. I should have said no. I should have thanked him and walked away, because he was a stranger, and I had just thrown myself at him in a way that broke every basic rule of personal safety. But something about him felt safe in a way that defied logic. Something in how he had held me, as if maybe, for the first time in a long time, he had needed it too, and it made me trust him. Okay, I said, my voice still shaky but steadier. Thank you. As we walked side by side, I couldn't help glancing at him out of the corner of my eye. He was even more striking under the streetlight, all hard lines and a presence that took up too much space, making people instinctively step aside as we passed. There was something dangerous about him, something my conscious mind should have flagged as a warning, but all I could feel was gratitude, because for the first time on that horrible day, I wasn't alone. And when our fingers brushed against each other by accident as we walked, when I felt electricity run across my skin from that smallest of touches, I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't understand that that desperate hug on a park bench had changed everything. I didn't understand that the dangerous stranger walking beside me was going to become my downfall and my salvation all at once. I didn't understand anything, not yet. Imagine if he sent you a message right now. What would you say to him? Chapter 2. The Strange Offer and the Temporary Change.
I need your help.
This is gonna cost you.
The cafe was small, one of those hidden spots tucked between old buildings that you only find if you really know the city, or if someone who does takes you there. Maurizio led me to a table in the farthest corner, away from the windows, away from the few scattered customers talking quietly about their normal, carefree lives. When he sat down across from me, the dim, warm glow of the lamp above the table revealed details I hadn't been able to catch at the park, lost as I was in the chaos of my own tears. His hands were large, masculine in a way that made mine look ridiculously small by comparison, and there were thin scars snaking across his knuckles. White marks against lightly tanned skin that told stories I wasn't sure I wanted to know. There was a permanent tension in his broad shoulders, in the muscles that pressed through his dark shirt, as if he were always ready for something, always bracing for a danger only he could see. And his eyes. God, those dark eyes that seemed to absorb all the light around them, studying me with an intensity that should have made me look away, but held me instead, like an irresistible magnet. Sorry for unloading on a stranger, I said, breaking the heavy silence as I tore at a paper napkin, until it crumbled into tiny pieces between my restless fingers. My eyes still burned. My face had to look awful, swollen and red from crying, but he didn't seem to mind, or at least had the decency not to show it. Maurizio, his voice cut through my spiral of self-deprecating thoughts, deep, husky, with a slight accent I now recognized as Italian. My name, something about the directness of it, no small talk, no unnecessary formalities, made me look up and actually see him. Riley, Lloyd, and thank you for listening, and for the hug, even though it's clearly not your thing. I took in his posture, rigid and controlled, as if relaxing were a dangerous luxury he couldn't afford. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but the promise of one, and my stomach did that strange thing again, a tightening that had nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with the man sitting across from me. It's not, but you needed it. You're kind, I said, and for the first time since walking out of that godforsaken doctor's office, I felt something other than pain tearing through my chest, hidden underneath that resting unfriendly face and that whole touch me and I bite energy. He laughed. It was a short, dry sound, almost rusty, like laughter was something he didn't get much practice with, but it was real and unexpectedly beautiful. Kind. First time anyone's ever called me that. Seriously? I tilted my head, genuinely curious. What do people usually call you? Things you don't need to know, he said, and there was dark humor in his voice. An inside joke I didn't get but suddenly wanted to. The waitress brought coffee, 2 small cups of espresso so strong that the smell alone felt like it could keep me awake for days. Maurizio picked his up with those large, scarred hands, and I found myself watching the movement, the way his fingers wrapped around the delicate porcelain with a carefulness that clashed brutally with everything else about him. And then we started talking, really talking. I told him about my dad, about how he raised me on his own after my mom died from complications during the birth of my sister who never made it, about how he was stubborn and funny and strong even when he shouldn't have been, even when the whole world seemed to be working against him. I told him about the mornings Dad burned pancakes trying to make a special breakfast, about how he taught me to ride a bike even though he was terrified I'd get hurt, about how every I love you from him felt like it carried the weight of 2 parents at once. Maurizio listened, really listened. Not that polite kind of listening people do while waiting for their turn to talk. It was a complete and absolute attention that felt rare for him, as if he didn't usually have the patience or the interest for it. But with me it was different, and the more I talked, the easier it got, like the words had needed to come out before they suffocated me, and he was the perfect, safe place to hold them. "He sounds like a good man," Maurizio said at some point, his voice low and steady. "Your father. The best." My voice broke again, and I bit down on my lip hard enough to sting. "And now he's going to die, and I don't know how I'm supposed to survive that." Something moved through his eyes in that moment, something dark and painful and old, as if my words had touched a wound that had never fully healed. "You survive because you don't have a choice, because it's what the people who love us want, for us to keep going." The way he said it, with a brutal certainty born from personal experience, made me realize that he knew. He understood loss in an intimate and terrible way, and somehow that connected us more deeply than anything else could have. The coffee went cold while we talked, and night fell completely outside, turning the windows into dark mirrors that reflected our small bubble of light back at us. At some point I mentioned, almost without thinking, that I lived alone in an apartment on the other side of the city, too far from the hospital, that I'd be spending the next 6 months making that exhausting back-and-forth trip, taking care of him, trying to make every day count because they were the last ones we'd have together. There was a pause, long and heavy, and then Maurizio said, and there was a strange quality to his voice, almost impulsive, like the words had come out before he could filter or think them through. "Stay at my place." I froze with my cup halfway to my mouth, completely still. "What?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and his dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart slam in my chest. The sudden closeness stole the air from my lungs. I could feel the heat radiating off him, could see every detail of those nearly black irises. "I have space, a mansion, extra rooms nobody uses. You'd be close to the hospital, no rent, no complications, temporary, until your father." He paused, and something crossed his face, something that looked like old pain and deep understanding. "Until you don't need it anymore." "Maurizio, we met a few hours ago," I said, my voice rising slightly. "This is completely insane. You don't know me, I don't know you, and you're offering me your house like it's crazy." "I know." He cut in, and there was something tight in the way he said it that made me realize even he found this absurd, that some rational part of him was screaming that this was a mistake. "But the offer stands anyway. No strings, no expectations. Nothing expected from you, just space and safety, which you clearly need right now." I studied him, really studied him. Every hard, masculine line of his face, every visible scar on his hands and probably hidden ones beneath his clothes, every sign of danger that should have made me stand up and walk out without looking back. But my instinct, that persistent voice deep in my mind that had always guided me even when logic said otherwise, was screaming that he was safe, that despite everything that looked dangerous and forbidden, I would be protected with him in a way that went beyond rational understanding. "Why?" I whispered, leaning forward too, our faces now dangerously close across the small table. "Why would you do this for someone you met crying on a park bench?" He was quiet for a long moment, so quiet I could hear my own heart beating out of rhythm. And then, with a brutal honesty that seemed to cost him something precious, he said, "I don't know. I genuinely don't know, but I'm offering anyway. So the question is, do you accept?" The tears came back, but this time they were something completely different. Not despair or pain, pure gratitude mixed with relief, something that felt like fragile hope taking root in the middle of the chaos. "Yes, I accept, and thank you. Thank you so much." 3 days later, I was standing on the sidewalk in front of a mansion that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a movie about absurdly wealthy people. Tall, wrought-iron gates with elaborate detailing, perfectly manicured gardens, with plants that clearly had a dedicated groundskeeper. An imposing 3-story building in classic style that took up an entire block and screamed old money and entrenched power. And there I was, with my one small suitcase containing basically everything I owned, feeling completely ridiculous and out of place. "You're rich?" The words burst out of my mouth before my social filter could step in, and I'm sure my eyes were wide in the most embarrassing way as I looked from the mansion to Maurizio and back to the mansion. He was standing beside me, hands in the pockets of his dark dress pants, and there was something that might have been restrained amusement in the way he looked at me. Business. Successful. What kind of business gets you a mansion that looks like an Italian palace? Genuine curiosity mixed with a healthy dose of belated suspicion that really should have shown up before I agreed to move in with him. Import. Export, he said. And the answer was so deliberately vague it should have set off every alarm in my brain, but I was too tired, too emotionally drained, and somehow too inexplicably trusting of him to push any further. He guided me inside through a massive front door, and every step revealed more luxury than I knew existed outside of magazines. Italian marble floors that reflected the light like polished mirrors, crystal chandeliers hanging from soaring ceilings that looked like expensive works of art, furniture that was definitely valuable antiques and not cheap replicas, a sweeping staircase with carved wooden banisters curving upward in an elegant arc. Everything screamed serious money and consolidated power, and I felt even more out of place in my plain clothes with my beat-up suitcase. Staff appeared like silent ghosts, taking my bag before I could protest, disappearing into corridors that seemed to go on forever. Maurizio didn't seem to notice or care. He just kept walking with the natural confidence of someone who owns everything around him, and I followed, trying not to gape at each new display of outrageous wealth. Your room. He opened a door on the second floor, and I stepped into a space that was literally larger than my entire apartment, tiny balcony included, a king-size bed with sheets that looked like they had an astronomically high thread count, floor-to-ceiling windows with a panoramic view of the glittering city below, a private bathroom I could see through the half-open door, complete with a soaking tub that could easily fit 3 people, and a walk-in closet bigger than my old bedroom. Everything in shades of cream and soft gold, elegant without being showy, luxurious in a way that felt completely natural. Something inside me exploded, pure, unfiltered happiness, the kind of childlike, genuine emotion I couldn't contain even when the adult part of my brain told me I should be more composed. I screamed, a high-pitched sound of joy mixed with relief and gratitude, and before I could think or filter or remember that he wasn't a touchy person, I threw myself at him again. My arms wrapped around his neck and pulled tight, my whole body pressed against his with no space between us. I felt him go rigid, that same initial freeze, but this time it lasted less, as if his body were slowly remembering how to respond to that kind of physical contact. And when his arms wrapped around me in return, it was faster than the first time, less hesitant, those strong muscles adjusting around my smaller frame in a way that felt like a perfect fit. You hug a lot, he said against my hair, and there was something in his voice, not quite a complaint, more of a half-stunned observation. I laughed, the sound muffled against his chest, breathing in that woody scent with a hint of something darker that was already becoming familiar and comforting. It's my love language, physical touch. You're going to have to get used to it because I literally cannot stop. When I finally pulled back and looked up at his face, so close to mine, I saw something move through those dark eyes, something between genuine panic and amused resignation, and I could almost hear the thought, loud and clear, my God, what on earth have I done? But he didn't say a word. He just showed me, with surprising patience, where the soft towels were, the kind that felt like clouds, how the complicated heating and air conditioning system worked, where the massive kitchen was if I wanted something to eat during the night. And as he spoke in that low, controlled voice, I realized something fundamental had shifted, not just in my life, which had been turned completely upside down in the span of just a few days, but in him too. There was a microscopic lightness in his normally so controlled movements, an almost imperceptible softness that hadn't been there at the park or at the cafe, as if my loud, affectionate presence were slowly thawing something that had been frozen solid for a very long time. That night, lying in the most comfortable bed I had ever slept in, sinking into sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, staring up at the high ceiling with its plaster detailing, I thought about how absurdly strange and unpredictable life was. Less than a week ago I had a normal, predictable routine, and then came the news that destroyed everything. And now I was living in a mansion with a dangerous, wealthy stranger who had offered me shelter without asking for a single thing in return. A man who clearly didn't know how to give hugs, but had tried, for me, even when it was obvious it made him uncomfortable. A man who had dark secrets written into every hard line of his face and every scar on his hands, but who somehow made me feel safer than I had ever felt in my life. I still didn't understand any of it. I didn't understand why he had let me into his life so easily. I didn't understand why I had agreed to move in with him without a second thought. I didn't understand the strange, constant electricity that passed between us every time our eyes met, or he stood too close, and the air seemed to grow heavier. But as sleep gently pulled me under, wrapped in absurd comfort and emotional exhaustion, one certainty settled firmly in my chest. My life would never be the same after Maurizio Giuliani, and in a way that was simultaneously terrifying and thrilling. I knew he was going to change absolutely everything. I just had no idea how much. Chapter 3: Strange Routine and Unsolicited Help.
Relax your shoulder. Good, just let the tension go.
Oh, okay.
That's much better. See you next week.
3 weeks passed in a strange blur of normalcy inside the chaos. I had built a routine that seemed to work, even if it was completely surreal. I'd wake up early, have coffee in that massive kitchen with more professional equipment than most actual restaurants, and head to the hospital to spend the entire morning with my dad. We'd talk. Sometimes he managed to laugh at my terrible jokes. Other times he'd just hold my hand while the exhaustion took over, and I'd try not to let him see my tears. I'd come back to the mansion in the middle of the afternoon, and that's when things started getting interesting in ways I hadn't planned for. I couldn't just exist in that enormous space without doing anything. It wasn't in my nature to be passive, especially not when Maurizio had given me a roof over my head, food, and safety, without asking for a single thing in return. So I started helping, or at least what I considered helping. First, it was the living room. The staff, who appeared and disappeared like silent ghosts, had left a few pillows crooked on the enormous sofa. A tiny thing, a detail most people wouldn't even notice, but it bothered me. I straightened them, reorganized the magazines on the coffee table by topic and date, adjusted the angle of the flower vase to catch the light from the window better. The older housekeeper, an Italian woman with gray hair named Rosa, found me in the middle of my reorganizing and stood in the doorway with an expression somewhere between confusion and polite horror. "Miss Lloyd," she said with a heavy accent, "you don't need to do this. It's our job." "I know." I smiled at her, way too enthusiastically, "but I like making things look nice, and I have free time. Think of it as creative collaboration?" Rosa looked around as if checking whether anyone else was witnessing this, then let out a sigh that made it perfectly clear she thought I was out of my mind, but was too polite to say so. "As you wish." Then came the kitchen. I opened the enormous refrigerator and stared at the contents in growing horror. Meat, more meat, cheeses, meat again. Like, where on earth were the vegetables, the fruit, anything green that wasn't mold? I grabbed my phone and made a grocery list that seemed more appropriate for a complete human being, and not just a carnivore. And when the private chef, because of course there was a private chef, showed up to prepare dinner, he nearly had a breakdown when he saw my tomatoes and broccoli taking up prime real estate. "Signorina," he said, staring at the vegetables like they were alien invaders, "Mr. Giuliani does not eat these things." "Well, he should," I said firmly. "Nobody survives on protein alone. He needs fiber, vitamins, some green in his life." The chef opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, clearly at a loss for how to argue with that, and finally muttered something in Italian that I was pretty sure wasn't a compliment. But it was when I walked into Maurizio's office that things really escalated. He had left for some vague meeting I didn't question, and I was walking down the hallway when I noticed the door slightly ajar. Curiosity pulled me inside. The room was impressive, all dark wood and bookshelves lined with volumes that probably cost more than a car. But his desk was an absolute disaster. Papers stacked with no apparent order, documents mixed together, folders with no labels. My fingers tingled, my organizer brain screamed, and before the rational part of me could intervene, I was in the middle of the chaos doing what I did best, bringing order to the universe. I sorted by date, then by category. Business here, contracts there, financial documents in another pile. I found labels in a drawer and started tagging everything systematically. It was almost meditative, the process of turning chaos into comprehensible structure. I was so absorbed that I didn't hear the door open fully, didn't hear footsteps on the hardwood floor. I only registered the presence when his voice sliced through the silence, and the tone was something I had never heard from him before. Cold, controlled, dangerous. Riley, one word, just my name, but it carried the weight of a real threat. "Do not touch my documents." I jumped, dropping the folder in my hand, and spun around too fast, nearly losing my balance. Maurizio was in the doorway, and there was something different about him. His posture was more rigid, his shoulders tense in a way I hadn't seen before, and his dark eyes held a coldness that made something freeze in my stomach. For just a second, I saw the dangerous man he probably was in his world, and it was terrifying. But I organized everything. The words came out fast and defensive as I pointed to the now perfectly arranged papers. By date, by category. "It's so much better now. You can actually find things." He stood there for a long moment, just looking from the organized desk to me and back to the desk. Something moved across his face. The tension dropped microscopically, and when he stepped closer to examine my work, I held my breath. Maurizio picked up one of the labeled folders, opened it, flipped through quickly, picked up another, checked the dates, and then To my absolute surprise, his shoulders relaxed, just a little. It's actually better, he admitted, and the dangerous edge had left his voice. But you ask before you touch my things. Always. Understood? I'm sorry, I said quickly, genuinely sorry for crossing a line I hadn't known existed. I just wanted to help. You gave me a home, safety, all of this, and I need to give something back somehow. Organizing things is what I know how to do. He sighed, long and tired, running a hand through his dark hair in a way that left it slightly mussed and ridiculously attractive. How am I supposed to say no to you? You don't. I smiled, small and hopeful. You accept that I'm useful and let me keep helping. He shook his head, but there was something at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile, and I knew I had won that round. It was 2 days later that Nico showed up. I was in the kitchen trying to convince the chef that grilled chicken with vegetables was a perfectly acceptable meal when I heard male voices coming from the living room. One was Maurizio's. The other was unfamiliar, rougher, with a heavier Italian accent. Curiosity pulled me through the doorway, and I found Maurizio talking to a man who looked like he'd been cast from the same dangerous mold. Tall, muscular, a visible scar cutting across his left eyebrow, and eyes that assessed me with instant suspicion the moment he saw me. "Hi," I said, way too cheerfully for the situation. "You must be a friend of Maurizio's. I'm Riley." The man froze, completely. He looked from me to Maurizio with an expression of absolute shock. "Who the hell is this?" he hissed in Maurizio's direction, but loud enough for me to hear perfectly clearly. Maurizio turned toward me, something tense in the way he was positioned, as if he were placing himself between me and a potential threat. "Riley, this is Nico, business partner. Nico, Riley is staying here, temporarily." Nico looked at me like I had grown a second head. "Why? You never bring anyone home. Is she your girlfriend?" "No," Maurizio answered too quickly, and I tried to ignore the strange little squeeze in my chest at the sheer vehemence of it. "She's a friend. She needs a place to stay. That's all." Nico kept studying me with narrowed eyes, sizing up every detail like I was a complicated puzzle. "Boss, can I talk to you? Privately?" They moved to the corner of the room, but I had good ears, especially when Nico was clearly trying to whisper and failing miserably. "Boss, she's a risk. Civilians are always a risk. You know that. Why in the world would you—" "She stays." Maurizio's voice cut in, and there was absolute coldness there, the same I had heard in the office. "This isn't up for discussion. Don't question it. She stays." There was a pause, and then Nico said, quieter, but still audible, "You're different with her." "That's dangerous." "I know," Maurizio replied, and there was something tired in the admission. "But you can run a check on her if you need to, for your peace of mind. Then you accept it." Nico sighed, defeated. "All right, boss, but if she causes a problem—" "She won't." Absolute certainty. They came back, and Nico looked at me with an expression that was slightly less hostile but still guarded. "Nice to meet you, Riley." "You too." I smiled, trying to be friendly even knowing he was probably about to investigate every corner of my life. "Want to stay for dinner? I'm making chicken with vegetables." Nico looked at Maurizio with an expression that very clearly said, "Vegetables?" And Maurizio just shrugged, resigned. That night, well after Nico had left and the mansion had sunk into heavy silence, I woke up thirsty. The digital clock glowed 2:17 a.m. in red, accusing numbers. I came downstairs trying not to make noise, but as I passed the office, I saw light slipping from under the door. I opened it slowly and found Maurizio hunched over the desk, surrounded by those same documents I had organized, eyes fixed on numbers that made my head hurt, just looking at them. "Do you ever sleep?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up, and there was a deep exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that comes from more than just one sleepless night. "A little. Always have." "That's not healthy." I stepped all the way in, crossing my arms. "Your body needs rest. Your brain needs to shut off. You're going to work yourself to death." "I have a lot to do," he said, going back to his documents as if that settled it. But I wasn't someone who accepted being dismissed easily. "Come on, now." He looked up again, surprised. "What?" "Come on," I repeated, walking up to the desk. "I'll make tea. We'll watch something completely silly and pointless. You relax for 1 hour, just one. Then you can come back and work yourself to death." "Riley, I don't relax. That's not how I work." "Well, that's how it works now." I took his hand, large and warm and calloused, and pulled, physically pulled, and to my surprise, he let himself be lifted, as if the part of him that knew I was right had beaten the stubborn part. "Now you're going to the couch. I'll make chamomile tea, which is wonderful for calming down, and we're going to watch something dumb until you admit you're tired." 15 minutes later, we were sunk into the monstrously comfortable living room sofa, steaming cups of tea in hand, and I was scrolling through streaming channels until I found a cheesy romantic comedy that looked like it had been designed designed specifically to turn your brain off. Maurizio was rigid beside me, posture tense as if being there were a form of torture, but I ignored it completely and hit play. The movie was exactly the kind of nonsense I needed. A clumsy protagonist, a love interest who was obviously perfect from scene one, ridiculous situations that would never happen in real life, pure sugary escapism. And at some point, somewhere around the halfway mark, when the protagonist literally fell on top of the guy, in a way that defied all laws of physics, I heard it. A small sound, almost imperceptible. A laugh. My head turned so fast I nearly hurt my neck. Maurizio had his hand covering part of his face, but I could see it. The corner of his mouth lifted. His eyes, brighter than usual. He had laughed. "You laughed!" I practically shouted, pointing at him accusingly. "I made you laugh!" He tried to pull his expression back to neutral, but it was too late. "It was stupid. The movie is stupid. But you liked it," I insisted, nudging his arm. "Admit it. You thought it was funny." He sighed. That resignation I was starting to recognize as surrender. Maybe, minimally. I smiled, victorious, and settled deeper into the sofa. The tiredness was starting to set in, a combination of a long day at the hospital and the ridiculous hour. Without really thinking about it, I let my head rest on his shoulder, solid and warm, smelling of that woody scent that had already become comforting. I felt him freeze again, that instant rigidity that came every time I touched him. But this time I waited, because I had learned that he needed time to process, to accept, to remember that touch wasn't a threat. And eventually, slowly, he relaxed. He didn't move his shoulder, didn't pull away. He simply accepted my weight against him, and we kept watching the ridiculous movie while my eyes grew heavier and heavier. The last thing I remember before drifting off was the feeling of absolute safety, wrapped in his warmth, his scent, the solid presence that seemed to promise that nothing bad could reach me there. I woke up in the morning in my own bed, covered with the blanket I had left folded on the armchair. I didn't remember climbing the stairs, didn't remember walking to my room, but I remembered the woody scent soaked into my pajamas, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that Maurizio had carried me, had put me to bed, had covered me up. And when I came downstairs for coffee, he was in the kitchen drinking espresso and looking at documents on his tablet. But when he saw me, something moved through his eyes, something soft that I couldn't name. "Good morning," he said simply. "Good morning," I answered, smiling. "Thank you for taking me to bed, and for watching a silly movie with me." He shrugged, as if it were nothing important. But I knew better. I knew that every small shift in him, every reluctant smile, every touch accepted, was a meaningful victory against whatever had frozen him so completely. And as I sat down to have my coffee, watching him pretend to be focused on his tablet when he was actually watching me out of the corner of his eye, I realized something was happening between us, something that went beyond gratitude or convenience, something that was equal parts frightening and thrilling. I just didn't know yet how deep it went. Chapter 4: The Horrifying Discovery.
You lied to me.
I woke up disoriented, blinking against the morning light pouring through my bedroom windows. Wait. My bedroom? I was sure I had fallen asleep on the couch, leaning against Maurizio's shoulder while that ridiculous romantic comedy played in the background. But here I was in my bed, covered with the blanket I recognized from the living room, my body sinking into the absurdly comfortable mattress. He had carried me. Again. The mental image hit me with a strange force. Maurizio picking me up, climbing the stairs, setting me down carefully enough that I didn't wake up. My stomach did that weird thing I was really trying to ignore. I got up, pulled my messy hair into a lopsided ponytail, and headed downstairs looking for him. I needed to say thank you, maybe get him to admit he'd been kind again, tease him, until I saw that almost smile that was becoming addictive. But the mansion was strangely quiet, the kitchen empty, the living room the same. His office door was closed, and when I knocked, there was no answer. I wandered through the wide hallways trying to remember the layout of that enormous place, turning corners I might never have explored before. The mansion was a confusing labyrinth of doors and passages, and I was officially lost. That's when I saw a door slightly ajar at the end of a darker hallway, where the elegant decor gave way to something more utilitarian. Light slipped through the gap, and I heard male voices coming from inside. One of them was definitely Maurizio's. Perfect. I'd find him. Say good morning, maybe make him laugh again if I was lucky. I pushed the door open a little more, a smile already forming on my lips, and what I saw made my brain freeze completely. It wasn't an office, it wasn't a sitting room. It was a basement converted into something that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a Mafia movie I used to watch late at night and always thought was too over the top to be real. Maurizio stood in the center, a gun in his right hand pointed casually downward, white shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing muscular, tense forearms. Nico stood beside him, expression hard and unrelenting. 3 other men I had never seen before formed a threatening semicircle, and in the chair in the middle of all of them, bound with ropes that cut into his skin, bleeding from places I didn't want to identify, sat a man who was crying and begging in a broken voice. Last chance. Maurizio's voice was absolute ice, so cold I barely recognized it. Where is the money? The bound man sobbed, his body shaking violently. I swear I don't know anything. Please, Maurizio sighed, like someone exhausted by a pointless conversation, raised the gun in a fluid, casual motion that spoke of extensive practice, aimed, and fired. The sound exploded in the enclosed space, deafening and horrible. The man screamed, a sharp, raw sound of pure pain as the bullet tore through his thigh, blood pouring instantly, staining the concrete floor, and I screamed too, loud, piercing, pure shock and horror turning into a sound that ripped out of my throat. What the actual hell? Everyone froze, like statues. 5 pairs of eyes snapped in my direction simultaneously, and the silence that followed was so heavy, I could feel the physical weight of it crushing my chest. Maurizio spun around completely, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw genuine panic cross that normally so controlled face. Riley? The gun was still in his hand, but pointed down, forgotten. What are you? How did you? But I wasn't processing specific words anymore. My brain was taking in the scene in chaotic, terrifying fragments. Blood, a gun, a man crying, tied to a chair. Maurizio, the same man who had hugged me in the park, who had watched a romantic comedy with me, who had carried me to bed with such care, was torturing someone like it was a perfectly normal Tuesday. You're torturing someone? My voice came out hysterical, climbing octaves. I pointed accusingly at the whole scene, my hand shaking violently. With a gun! There's blood everywhere! Maurizio, he set the gun down on the side table with deliberate care, as if a sudden movement might frighten me even more, and started walking toward me. Riley, calm down. Breathe. Let me explain. Explain? I backed away automatically, my shoulders hitting the wall of the hallway behind me. My brain was short-circuiting, trying to reconcile the Maurizio I knew with the man who had just shot someone without blinking. You kill people? He stopped a few steps away, hands raised slightly, like he was dealing with a frightened animal, and when he spoke, his voice was strangely soft, far too controlled for the absolutely insane situation. Occasionally, when necessary, for a second I just stood there, processing, and then something inside me broke and turned horror into hysterical laughter that bubbled up from my throat without permission. Occasionally, I was laughing, but also kind of crying, the sounds coming out mixed and confused. Like, what? Oh, Tuesday killing day, let me check the schedule. What are you? Nico stepped closer to Maurizio, whispering but not nearly quietly enough. Boss, she didn't know? No, Maurizio practically growled, not taking his eyes off me. Obviously not. And then everything started clicking into place in horrible, terrifying ways. The business. My voice came out weaker now, the realization hitting like a cold wave. Import, export. That was a lie? Technically no, he said, and there was something almost apologetic in the careful way he chose his words. I do import and export. It's just that, not always legal things, or in legal ways. My legs went weak, literally, without the strength to hold me up. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold hallway floor, knees pulled against my chest, hands trembling uncontrollably. I hugged you, I said, my voice distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I hugged a killer. I'm living in a killer's house. I organized crime documents. Maurizio crouched in front of me, lowering himself to my level, and his large, warm hands came to rest on my shoulders. Hands I had watched holding a gun 30 seconds ago. Hands that had killed. My entire body shuddered. Riley, breathe, he commanded, his voice firm but gentle. Look at me. Look at me. I forced my eyes to focus on his face, so close to mine, and saw something there I hadn't expected. Concern, genuine fear, not for himself, but for me, for how I was reacting. I will never hurt you, he said each word slowly, with absolute weight and certainty. Never. You are safe. With me. Always. That doesn't change. Nothing changes. You kill people, I repeated, because my brain was stuck on that impossible fact. Yes, he didn't deny it, didn't soften it, but never innocent people. Only people from my world who betray me or who threaten people I protect. Something about the way he said that last part made my stomach clench. And me? The question came out desperate. What am I to you? A charity project, A witness you're going to have to get rid of. His expression shifted. Something moved through those dark eyes. Something intense and frightening and too real. Someone I protect, he said, and for the first time I heard genuine vulnerability in his voice. More than anyone. More than anything. You are. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I could read between the lines, in the way he looked at me like I was precious and fragile and important in ways he didn't know how to put into words. I don't. My voice failed. Tears started falling, a mix of fear and confusion, and something more complicated that I didn't want to name. I need to process this. All of it. I need to process it, he said immediately without hesitation. Stay here, or go. Leave if you need to. I understand. Whatever choice you make, I'll accept it. But you need to know. He paused. Swallowed hard. You are still safe. You always will be. I looked at him for a long moment, seeing layers I hadn't noticed before. The dangerous man, the cold-blooded killer, but also the man who had held me when I was falling apart, who had watched a stupid movie with me, who had carried me to bed with such care. They were the same person, and my brain was fighting to accept that. I stood up, legs unsteady, and without another word turned and walked to my room. I heard Maurizio rise behind me, but he didn't follow. He gave me the space I so desperately needed. I closed the bedroom door, locked it, and slid down until I was sitting with my back against the solid wood. My whole body was trembling, adrenaline running wild through my veins. Downstairs I could hear muffled voices, Nico's, tense and urgent. Boss, she's going to talk. To the police? To the FBI. We have to— No. Maurizio's voice cut like a blade, and there was something absolutely lethal in it that made even me, locked on the floor above, go still. Do not touch her. Nobody touches her. Nobody threatens her. Nobody goes near her. Understood? But boss— Nico tried. Understood! Maurizio's roar echoed through the entire mansion. Pure, protective fury, and I heard Nico retreat in quick footsteps. Yes, boss. Understood. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. I wrapped my arms around my knees and pulled them to my chest, trying to control my breathing as it came out in uneven sobs. Maurizio Giuliani was part of the Mafia. He killed people, tortured them, lived in a world of violence and blood that I couldn't begin to comprehend. Everything I thought I knew about him was, not exactly a lie, but an incomplete and sanitized version of a brutal truth. I should have been terrified, should have grabbed my things and run, called the police, done what any sensible person would do. But my traitorous mind kept going back to the way he had looked at me, to the genuine concern on his face, to the way he had said more than anyone, like I was too important to lose, to the fact that despite who he was and what he did, he had never made me feel anything but safe. I didn't understand how I could still trust him after what I had seen, didn't understand why every instinct was screaming at me to stay when logic was screaming at me to run, didn't understand why the idea of leaving him hurt more than the fear. Hours passed. The light outside my window shifted, the sun climbing higher while I sat there processing impossible truths. At some point I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, stopping in front of my door. A long silence, and then his voice, low and husky through the wood. Riley, you don't have to say anything. I just want you to know. I'm sorry that you saw that you found out this way. You deserved better than that. A pause, a heavy breath. If you decide to leave, I understand. I'll help you, take you wherever you want to go, protect you even from a distance. But if— Another pause, longer this time. If you stay, nothing changes. Between us, you're still important, still safe, still everything. Footsteps faded away, and I sat there with my heart beating out of rhythm, knowing I had an impossible decision ahead of me. Stay or go, trust or run, accept the whole man, the darkness, the danger, all of it, or protect myself by walking away. And as night fell and the mansion sank into a heavy, waiting silence, I realized something terrifying. I already knew what my choice would be. I just needed to find the courage to make it. Chapter 5: The Choice and the Beginning of Change.
I'm not leaving.
I spent hours sitting on that floor, back against the locked door, staring at nothing while my brain tried to process the impossible. The light coming through the window shifted from gold to orange to purple, the sunset painting the room in colors that should have been beautiful, but that I barely registered. My body was numb, as if the shock had burned through my capacity to feel anything physical. But my mind was in absolute overdrive. I started doing what I always did when I needed to make impossible decisions. Mental list, pros and cons, cold logic applied to a situation that was anything but logical. Cons: he kills people. Not occasionally like going to the dentist. He kills. With a gun. Blood. Torture. He's part of the Mafia. which means his entire way of life revolves around crime and violence. Dangerous not only to himself, but potentially to anyone near him, including me. I could be arrested just for association, could become a target, could end up witnessing things worse than that scene in the basement. He lied, technically, about his business. He withheld an enormous truth about who he really is. The cons list was long, terrifying, rational. Pros, he protects me, not just physically by giving me a roof and safety, but viscerally and absolutely. I saw that when he roared at Nico not to touch me. He is gentle with me in a way that he clearly isn't with anyone else, as if I have access to a version of him the rest of the world doesn't even know exists. He has never hurt me, not when I invaded his space, went through his things, questioned him. He gave me a home without asking for anything in return when I was too vulnerable to protect myself. The way he looks at me, like I'm precious and important and necessary in ways he doesn't know how to say out loud. The way he started to change, small cracks in that armor of ice, reluctant laughs and hesitant hugs that belonged only to me. And something deeper, something I didn't want to admit, but that pulsed true in my chest. He makes me feel safe even though he is objectively dangerous, and that should be a contradiction, but it isn't. I sat there, weighing it all. Rational versus emotional, logic versus instinct, safety versus what? Love? Was it love already? Or was it just gratitude warped by trauma? My father was dying. I was vulnerable, emotional, not thinking straight. Maybe all of this was some bizarre version of Stockholm Syndrome, where I was latching onto the first man who showed me care while my world was collapsing. But then I thought about the way he froze every time I touched him. As if physical contact were a dead language he was relearning letter by letter. I thought about the genuine panic on his face when he saw me in that basement, not because his secret had been discovered, but because I was scared. I thought about how he offered to let me go, to accept any choice, even though he clearly didn't want me to leave. That wasn't manipulation. Manipulators don't give you a real choice. They trap, control, force. Maurizio was giving me complete freedom to decide, and somehow that made the choice even harder. Night fell completely. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten anything all day. My mouth was dry, but mostly I was tired. Tired of processing, of weighing, of trying to make an impossible choice make sense. Deep down, I already knew. From the moment I saw the concern on his face, the way he had knelt in front of me as if I were too important to lose, I already knew what my answer would be. I just needed the courage to say it out loud. I got up, legs tingling from being folded so long, and unlocked the door with hands that trembled slightly. The mansion was quiet in a heavy way, as if the house itself were holding its breath waiting for my decision. I came down the stairs slowly, each step feeling more significant than it should. I didn't know where he would be, but something pulled me toward the living room, and when I reached the doorway, I found him. Maurizio was sitting on the same couch where we had watched that ridiculous movie, but there was nothing relaxed about his posture now. He was hunched forward, elbows on his knees, a glass of whiskey in his hand that he was gripping hard enough to whiten his knuckles. The light from the side lamp threw sharp shadows across his face, deepening every line of tension. He looked up when he heard me, and the relief that crossed those dark eyes was so intense it was almost physical, as if he had been waiting for hours, and he probably had, not knowing whether I would come downstairs, or whether he'd wake up to find my things gone, and me disappeared forever. I'm not leaving. The words came out before I could rehearse them, steady and certain. He stood up so fast the whiskey nearly spilled, setting the glass down on the table with a sharp movement that spoke of slipping control. Why? The question came out raspy, heavy with something that sounded like desperate hope, mixed with genuine confusion. I took a few steps into the room, keeping a safe distance because I still needed to say everything, process it all out loud. Because you scare me. Your world scares the hell out of me. What you do, who you are in that basement, that terrifies me in ways I didn't know were possible. A pause, a deep breath. But you, with me, you're gentle, protective, human in ways that contradict everything else. And I saw the way you look at me, how you treat me, like I matter, like I'm precious. And that's real, isn't it? Even in the middle of all of it, all the blood and violence and danger, the way you are with me is real. He took a step toward me, slow, as if afraid that a sudden movement might startle me. It's real. His voice came out low and intense, loaded with absolute truth, more real than anything else in my life. You're the only real thing I have. Something in my chest clenched painfully. But I have conditions. He stopped, muscles tense, braced. What conditions? I raised one finger. 1, you don't kill anywhere near me. Ever. I don't need to see it. I don't want to be near it. That world, that part of you, stays separate from me. He nodded. Serious. Done. Second finger. 2, you tell me. Always. When something dangerous is happening. When there's a threat. No lies. No withholding things to protect me. I deserve to know when I'm at risk. Agreed. No hesitation. Third finger. and this one was the hardest. 3. You try to be less cold with the world, not just with me. You have humanity, Maurizio. I've seen it, but you hide it from everyone except me. I want you to try letting other people see it too. Be less frozen. Something crossed his face, almost a smile, but with pain at the edges. 3 is hard, very hard. I crossed my arms, firm. I know, but try. For me, because if I'm going to stay in this crazy world with you, I need to know you're not going to lose yourself in it completely. That the man who hugged me on that park bench still exists underneath everything else. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, and then he sighed, long and deep, complete surrender. Okay, I'll try. All 3. For you. I'll try anything. The relief hit me like a wave, dissolving the tension I hadn't even realized I'd been holding in my shoulders. I smiled, small but real, and crossed the remaining distance between us, and I hugged him. I threw my arms around his torso, face pressed against his chest where I could hear his heart beating too fast, and held on like he was an anchor in a storm. This time there was no freezing, no hesitation. His arms wrapped around me immediately, tight and steady and desperate, as if he had been waiting hours for permission to touch me. I felt when he buried his face in my hair, his breath warm against my scalp. "You're still hugging me," he murmured, his voice muffled and faintly disbelieving. "Even knowing, even after seeing, you still need it," I answered, holding tighter. "Maybe more now that I know how much you carry alone." Something in him melted. I felt it happen, the way every muscle softened against me, as if finally, for the first time since I had opened that basement door, he could actually breathe. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair, "for staying, for not running, for seeing who I am, and choosing to stay anyway." We stayed like that for a length of time I couldn't measure, just holding each other, and something fundamental shifted between us in that embrace. It was no longer me seeking comfort and him reluctantly giving it. It was mutual, an equal need on both sides. The days that followed brought tangible change, because now that I knew the truth, now that I had made a conscious choice to stay, everything was different. Maurizio showed me the real office, not the polished one I had organized, but the one hidden behind a secret panel, because of course there was a secret panel, where the actual business happened. And when I say actual business, I mean the documents that couldn't be mixed with the legitimate ones. "You don't need to see this," he had said, hesitant, when he took me there for the first time. "I do," I corrected. "If I'm going to stay, if I'm really going to be here, I need to understand." So, he showed me, and I learned. About imports that weren't exactly legal, exports of things governments didn't approve of, protection he offered to businesses in exchange for a cut, loans with interest rates that made regular loan sharks look charitable. But I also learned about the complexity, about how he never touched drugs, especially anything involving children, about the strict codes he had, lines he wouldn't cross even when it would have been profitable, about how he protected entire neighborhoods from worse gangs, maintaining order in places the police had long abandoned. It didn't make everything right, but it made it less black and white, and I started helping for real. I organized the legitimate business in ways that actually made fiscal sense, suggested improvements to processes he had been doing the same way for years because that's just how it's always been done, created filing systems that even Nico admitted were more efficient. "She's good at this," Nico had said to Maurizio one afternoon, thinking I couldn't hear from the room next door. But that mansion had treacherous acoustics, like really good. Maybe her being here isn't as bad as I thought. I know, Maurizio's voice had carried a smile, that rare, full one that I was starting to pull out of him with more frequency. I always knew. But it wasn't just the work that changed. It was him. Maurizio started hugging back, not just accepting my impulsive hugs with resignation, but initiating them. I'd come downstairs for coffee, and he'd pull me into a quick embrace before heading to a meeting. I'd finish organizing documents and feel arms wrap around my waist from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. He smiled more, still small, still rare enough to feel precious, but they existed. I'd make a terrible joke and see the corner of his mouth lift. Nico would say something sarcastic, and Maurizio would laugh. Brief, but real. Movie nights became routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, without fail, we'd sink into that couch, and I'd pick an increasingly ridiculous romantic comedy just to watch him try to hide the fact that he was enjoying it. "This one is particularly awful," he had commented last week, eyes glued to the screen even as he complained. "You love it," I teased, poking his ribs. "Just admit it. I tolerate it. For you. Liar." And he had laughed, that sound that still surprised me every single time, and pulled me closer until I was tucked against his side, head on his shoulder, his arm around mine. Nico noticed. Rosa noticed. Everyone in the mansion noticed that Maurizio was changing, becoming less frozen, more human, and they all looked at me like I had pulled off some impossible magic trick. But I knew the truth. It wasn't magic. It was simply that he had spent so long alone, so completely cut off from touch and affection and human warmth, that when he finally allowed someone in, when he finally lowered his defenses, the change was inevitable. He just needed someone who would stay long enough to see through the armor, and I had stayed. One night, 2 weeks after the discovery, we were on the couch again, some comedy playing that neither of us was really watching. My head was in his lap, eyes half closed, while his fingers played absently with my hair. "Are you happy?" I asked suddenly, looking up at his face. He looked down, meeting my eyes, and there was something so soft in his expression that my heart skipped, happier than I have any right to be. "That's nonsense," I said, reaching up to hold the hand that was in my hair. "You have every right to be happy. Everyone does, even people who do what I do." There was real doubt there, a vulnerability he rarely showed, especially people who do what you do. I squeezed his hand. "Because you need something to balance it out, something good to contrast with everything else. And if I can be that for you," I smiled, "then this is exactly where I want to be." Something moved through his eyes, something intense and deep, that made my stomach tighten. He leaned in, and for a second I thought he was going to kiss me, but instead, he pressed his forehead against mine, eyes closed, our breath mingling. "You're more than that," he murmured. "You're everything." We stayed like that, breathing together, and I felt it when everything shifted again. I was no longer a temporary guest, no longer a charity case or a project. I was his, and he was mine. In the middle of all the madness, the danger, the crime, and the blood, we had found something real and precious and improbable, and I was going to protect it with everything I had, even without knowing that danger was coming, that forces beyond our control were already in motion, that the FBI had eyes on him, and by extension on me. But that night, ignorant of the storm forming around us, I let myself feel nothing but the safety of his arms and the certainty that I had made the right choice. I had stayed, and I didn't regret a single second of it. Chapter 6.
I won't betray him.
The agent and the manipulation David Cross walked into my life on a rainy Tuesday, smiling too much and being kind in a way that should have set off every alarm but only made me think he was polite. I was in the meeting room, the one Maurizio used for appointments with legitimate business partners, arranging coffee cups and a few documents he had asked for. It wasn't exactly my job, but I liked helping, liked feeling useful, and Maurizio never complained when I showed up with fresh coffee in the middle of his conversations. The door opened, and in walked a man I had never seen before. Medium height, light brown hair styled with a casualness that was too deliberate to be real, a suit that said "trustworthy professional" without being flashy, and that smile, wide, friendly, reaching his eyes in a way that looked genuine. "Hi," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "You must be new here. I'm David Cross, business partner of Maurizio's." I set the tray on the table, wiping my hands on my pants. "Riley Lloyd, not exactly new, but not an official employee either, or anything like that." "Riley," he repeated my name like it tasted good, savoring every syllable. "What a beautiful name. Unique. Have you been working with Maurizio long?" Something about the question seemed innocent, just polite small talk, so I answered without thinking. "I don't exactly work here. I actually live here, and I help out when I can. Organizing things, handling the administrative side that he doesn't have the patience for." His eyes lit up with obvious interest, and he leaned slightly forward. "You live here? Wow, what an interesting arrangement. Are you two together? Dating?" I felt my face flush instantly, that treacherous warmth climbing up my neck. "No, it's complicated. We're close, but not officially anything. Complicated is usually the best part." He winked, friendly and conspiratorial, like we were sharing an inside joke. That's when Maurizio walked in. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and visceral. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Maurizio stopped in the doorway, his eyes moving from me to David and back, and there was something icy in the way he looked at the other man. Possessive, territorial, dangerous. "Meeting. Now." The words came out sharp, leaving no room for discussion. David straightened up, his expression shifting to professional in a fraction of a second, but not before I caught something pass through his eyes. Satisfaction? Amusement? It was gone too fast to identify. "Of course, Maurizio. I was just getting to know your assistant. Riley seems like a great addition to the team." Maurizio didn't respond. He just held the door open with an expression that very clearly said, "Step away from my girlfriend and get in here." I blinked, caught off guard by the intensity of his reaction, but David just smiled at me again, a small nod, and walked inside. The door closed, and I stood there, processing the strangeness of the encounter. Weeks passed, and David Cross became a frequent presence at the mansion. He came for meetings with Maurizio, always punctual, always professional with him, but he always found time to talk to me, and he was so kind. Riley, he'd greet me every time he saw me, as if my presence were the highlight of his day. "How's your father? I remember you mentioned he's been sick." The fact that he remembered touched me. "Getting worse," I'd admit, my voice going quieter. "But we still have time. I can still visit him." "You're so strong for doing that," he'd say, placing a hand on my shoulder in a comforting way. "Taking care of someone we love is one of the hardest things there is." Or when he'd find me in the kitchen, "Maurizio is lucky to have you here, you know? I bet this place was a lot colder before you showed up." I'd laugh, flattered by the attention. "I try to help. He works too hard. Someone's got to make sure he eats vegetables every now and then." And David asked questions. So many questions. But they all seemed so natural, so much like normal conversation, that I never suspected a thing. "Does Maurizio travel a lot?" he asked casually one afternoon, while waiting for Maurizio to finish a phone call. "Yes, quite a bit," I answered, happy to have company. "Just yesterday he went to New Jersey. Business with suppliers or something like that." "New Jersey? Interesting." David nodded, as if just making polite conversation. "And does he have a lot of partners? Business associates?" "Oh, several." I started counting on my fingers, remembering names I'd seen on documents. "There's Marco, who handles the import side at the port, and Gianna, who manages the restaurants, and that Victor, from the Russian side of things." I kept going, innocent and oblivious, spilling information as if I were sharing harmless gossip. David listened attentively, nodding at all the right moments, asking follow-up questions that seemed like genuine interest. "And the business, is it doing well? Maurizio seems very successful." "Very. I mean, just look at this place." I gestured at the mansion around us. "He must be doing incredibly well. Sometimes I'm just amazed at the volume of deals he closes." David smiled. He always smiled, and I thought I had made a friend. It never once crossed my mind that every word was being cataloged, analyzed, and used. It was Nico who noticed first. I was leaving the meeting room one afternoon when I heard tense voices coming from Maurizio's office. The door was slightly open, and I recognized them immediately. "Boss." Nico sounded worried, which was rare. He was usually pure confidence and control. "That David. He's asking way too many questions. About operations, about you, about the structure. He's a business partner." Maurizio's voice was neutral, but I knew him well enough by now to hear the underlying tension. "Partners ask questions. Not like this. And there's something else." Nico hesitated. "Riley, she's been telling him things. Innocently. I know she doesn't realize it, but she's dumping information on him every time he shows up." Heavy silence. When Maurizio spoke again, there was a coldness I knew very well. The dangerous coldness. "What exactly has she told him?" "Travel locations, names of associates, structure of operations, meeting schedules." Nico listed them off, and with each one my stomach sank, even though I didn't fully understand why. "Boss, I think David is a problem." "Dig into him," Maurizio ordered, his voice like a blade. "Deep. I want to know every detail of his life." Yesterday, I stepped back from the door before they could hear me, heart beating strangely in my chest. Had I done something wrong? Said things I shouldn't have? But they were just normal conversations. David was his partner. Why couldn't I talk to him? The paranoia began to settle in, slow and uncomfortable. 3 days later, Nico came back with information that changed everything. I wasn't there when he told Maurizio, but I heard the aftermath. The sound of something heavy being hurled against a wall, the roar of pure fury that echoed through the entire mansion, and made even Rosa freeze in the middle of folding laundry. I ran to the office, finding the door closed but raised voices leaking through. "A federal agent?" Maurizio's voice was loaded with fury, so concentrated it was almost tangible. "Undercover for 6 months?" "Confirmed," Nico answered tense. "FBI. His real name is still David Cross, but he's been working an operation to bring you down. And boss," a pause, "he's been using her, using Riley to get information on you." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Long, heavy, full of horrible implications. When Maurizio spoke again, his voice was too controlled, too calm, the kind of calm that came right before violence. "He's been using her to get to me. Riley doesn't know," Nico said quickly, defensive on my behalf. "She's completely innocent in all of this. She just talks, like she does with everyone." "I know," Maurizio said, and there was pain in the admission. "She trusts too easily. She sees kindness where there's manipulation. It's who she is. And that son of a bitch used it against her. Against me. What do we do?" A long pause. I pressed my ear against the door, barely breathing. "I handle him, personally. But Riley can't know yet. She'll feel guilty. Used. She'll blame herself for something that is not her fault. And when she finds out, then I deal with that too." The confrontation happened 2 days later. David had arrived for his usual meeting, that fake smile plastered on his face, and Maurizio led him to the private office, the one hidden behind the panel. I was upstairs, but curiosity pulled me down. Something about the tension in the air, the way Nico had positioned himself near the door like a guard, left me uneasy. I moved down the hallway that led to the secret office, stepping lightly, and that's when I heard it. Maurizio's voice, too calm, too dangerous. Agent Cross, how long do you think you have before I kill you? My blood went cold, the sound of a chair being shoved back violently. You know, David's voice, all the charm completely gone, replaced by pure panic. I know everything, Maurizio said, and I could perfectly picture the frozen expression on his face. FBI, 6 months undercover, and you using Riley to get information on me. A deadly pause. That was your fatal mistake. She's an accomplice! David shouted, and my heart stopped completely. She lives with you, helps you with the business, organizes your documents. She's going to prison too when I'm done. The sound of fast, heavy movement. She is innocent. Maurizio's voice was pure death. She knows nothing beyond what any civilian would know. And you will disappear, vanish, before you ever touch her, before you ever get near her. You can't kill me. David was clearly in full panic now. The FBI knows where I am. If I don't report in, then you better run. Cold interruption. Fast. The sound of running footsteps, a door flying open violently. I pressed myself against the wall, hidden in the shadow, and watched David rush past, face pale, sweat pouring down, gun shaking in his hand. He didn't even see me. He just ran for the exit like the devil was on his heels. And maybe it was. I stood there, processing the fragments of conversation I had heard, the words rearranging themselves into a horrible, unmistakable pattern. Accomplice, FBI, information, prison. David wasn't a business partner. He never had been. He was a federal agent trying to bring Maurizio down, and I had handed him everything he needed, every name, every location, every innocent detail I had shared thinking I was just making friendly conversation. I had been used, manipulated, turned into a weapon against the man I loved. The nausea hit me like a wave, and I had to grip the wall to keep from falling, hands shaking, breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. The office door opened again, and Maurizio walked out, Nico right behind him. He saw me immediately, froze in place. Our eyes met across the dark hallway, and I saw the exact moment he realized that I had heard, that I knew. Riley, he started, taking a step toward me, but I was already running. Up the stairs, locking the bedroom door, sliding down to sit on the floor as reality crushed down on me. I had given him away, innocently, stupidly, but I had. I had given the FBI everything they needed, and now they were coming for him, coming for me, because David was right. Wasn't he? I lived here. I helped. I organized illegal documents. I knew the names, the places, the operations. I was an accomplice. And everything I thought I had been building with Maurizio, all the safety I had found, was about to come apart, because the FBI was coming, and I had opened the door for them. Chapter 7. Choosing a side and facing the consequences.
I choose you.
I don't know how long I sat there on my bedroom floor, back against the locked door, trying to process the magnitude of the disaster I had caused. Tears ran silently down my face, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep, it doesn't even make a sound. It just hurts in ways words can't describe. I had been an idiot, a trusting, naive idiot who believed kindness was always genuine, that wide smiles meant good intentions, that a man asking polite questions was just being friendly. David Cross had manipulated me with an embarrassing ease, and I had handed him everything on a silver platter, every name, every location, every precious detail he needed to build a case against Maurizio. And the worst part, the part that truly destroyed me from the inside, was that I had done it to the man who had taken me in when I was broken, who had given me a home when I had nowhere to go, who had dismantled his armor of ice piece by piece because of me. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, heavy, purposeful. Maurizio. He stopped on the other side of the door, and the silence stretched for long minutes while neither of us knew how to begin that impossible conversation. Riley. His voice came through low and controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath. Open the door, please. I can't. The words came out broken, my voice rough from crying. I can't face you after what I did. You didn't do anything, he said, firm and immediate. None of this is your fault. I laughed, a bitter, wet sound. I didn't do anything? I told him everything, Maurizio. Every place you went, every name I saw in those documents. I handed a federal agent a complete map of your operations because I thought he was a nice guy. Because you trust people. His voice softened, almost gentle. Because you see the best in others. Because it's who you are. And that son of a bitch took advantage of that. He used you. That is not your fault. But I should have noticed. I pressed the back of my head against the door, frustration and guilt tangling into a painful knot in my chest. His questions, the way he always showed up, how he was too kind. I should have seen it. Why? The question came out calm, logical in a way that caught me off guard. You're not trained to identify undercover agents. You don't live in a world where you have to be suspicious of everyone who's nice to you. You're normal, Riley, human, and he used your humanity as a weapon. Something about the way he said that, the absolute understanding with not a single drop of blame or anger directed at me, made the tears come back with renewed force. They're going to arrest me, I whispered, the fear finally taking shape in words. David said, he said I'm an accomplice, that I'm going to prison too when he's done. Because I live here, because I help, because I know things. No. The word exploded out of him with a force that made the door vibrate. I will not allow it. You are not going to prison. I protect you. From everything. From everyone, including the FBI. How? I turned around, kneeling now, speaking directly to the solid wood between us. How do you protect me from the federal government? They have resources, power, the law on their side, and I have lawyers, he said, absolute determination in his voice. The best lawyers money can buy, lawyers who will prove you are completely innocent, that you never actively participated in anything illegal, that you only lived here, helped with basic household and administrative tasks. You didn't know anything, Riley. You had no way of knowing. But now I do know. The admission came out small, frightened. Now I know everything. About the business, about what you do, about all of it. Doesn't that automatically make me an accomplice? Silence on the other side. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more vulnerable. Open the door, please. I need to see you. I need to know you're okay. Something in the plea, in the way his normally so controlled voice was fraying at the edges, made me get up. My legs were unsteady, but I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. Maurizio was on the other side, one hand braced against the door frame, and he looked wrecked, hair disheveled like he had run his fingers through it a dozen times, shirt wrinkled, those dark eyes filled with a concern so intense it hurt to look at. I ruined everything, I said, a fresh wave of tears starting. I destroyed you. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, and before I could step back or process what was happening, his arms were around me, pulling me against his chest with a force that bordered on desperation. You haven't ruined anything, he said into my hair, his voice raw and intense. You are the only good thing in my life, the only pure thing, the only thing that matters more than any business or operation or money. I clung to him, fingers gripping his shirt hard enough to crumple the fabric. But the FBI, to hell with the FBI, he cut in, and there was fierce anger there, but none of it directed at me. They don't have anything on you. David talked to you. You answered questions that seemed harmless. That's not a crime. Talking is not conspiracy. You never transported anything. Never hid anything. Never did anything beyond being kind to someone who was lying about who he was. But what if, I started, the anxiety rising in my throat, and then he kissed me. He simply pulled me in, hands holding my face with a tenderness that clashed with the urgency of the kiss, and pressed his lips against mine. It was desperate and intense and completely unexpected, stealing the air from my lungs and every coherent thought from my head. I froze for a fraction of a second, shock holding me still, but then my body responded instinctively. My eyes closed, my hands came up to his chest, and I kissed him back with a need I hadn't known I'd been holding in. The kiss deepened, grew more intense, tongues meeting in a rhythm that was new and yet strangely familiar, as if we had been building toward this moment since that very first hug on the park bench. One of his hands slid to my neck, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw, while the other wrapped around my waist and pulled me impossibly closer. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathless, he kept his forehead pressed against mine, eyes closed, his breath warm against my lips. I will not let anything happen to you. He said each word separately, with the weight of an absolute promise. Never. Do you understand? I nodded, unable to form words, still processing the fact that he had kissed me, that I had kissed him back, that everything between us had fundamentally changed in those intense few seconds. You kissed me. I finally managed to whisper, my voice trembling. A small smile, almost shy, touched his lips. I'm sorry. I didn't know how else to convince you that everything is going to be okay. Kiss me again. The words came out before my filter could intervene, so I can actually believe it. His smile widened slightly, and then he pulled me into a second kiss. This one was slower, deeper, more deliberate, as if he were memorizing the taste of me, the feeling of my lips against his, the way I fit perfectly against his body. And when we pulled apart this time, something fundamental had solidified between us. It was no longer just attraction and chemistry, an unnamed emotional connection. It was concrete, real, impossible to deny. The days that followed were a strange mix of forced normalcy and mounting tension. Maurizio put lawyers to work on my case immediately, building a defense before a formal charge even existed. Nico tightened security around the mansion, extra men positioned at strategic points, and I tried to keep living, visiting my dad at the hospital, organizing the house, but always with that feeling of waiting, like a guillotine suspended over my head, and it was only a matter of time before it dropped. The drop came on a Thursday. 2 FBI agents showed up at the mansion's front door with an invitation to a voluntary interview. The words were polite, but the implication was clear. I could come willingly, or they would come back with an order, and it would be much worse. Maurizio was at my side when they delivered the invitation, and I felt every muscle in his body go tense, coiled for violence, but I placed a hand on his arm and held firm. "I'll go," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'll answer their questions." "Riley," he started, reluctance and worry battling across his expression. "I'll go," I repeated, meeting his eyes, "because running makes me look guilty, and I'm not. So I'll go, answer what they need to know, and come back home." One of the lawyers Maurizio had hired, a woman named Patricia, who looked like she ate prosecutors for breakfast, insisted on coming with me, which turned out to be a good thing, because when we arrived at the federal building and they led me into a small, claustrophobic interrogation room, I needed every ounce of confidence I could pull together. An agent sat across the table. Older man, salt and pepper hair, the expression of someone who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. A second agent stood near the door, watching in silence. "Ms. Lloyd," the seated agent began, opening a folder thick with documents I couldn't read upside down. "You live with Maurizio Giuliani, correct?" "Correct," I answered, keeping my voice steady. "And you're aware of what he does? The kind of business he conducts?" I glanced at Patricia, who gave a minimal nod. "Import and export business. Management of some restaurants and properties. Import and export," the agent repeated, his tone making it abundantly clear he didn't believe a word. "He kills people, Ms. Lloyd. Trafficking, extortion, money laundering. He is one of the most wanted mob bosses on the East Coast. You know that." I swallowed, but kept my eyes fixed on his. "What I know is that he gave me a home when I needed one, that he treats me with respect and kindness, that he has never hurt me or threatened me. Everything else?" I shrugged, hoping I looked calmer than I felt. "That's not my business." The agent leaned forward, his expression hardening. "You live in his house, help with his business, organize documents, know his associates. You are an accomplice, Ms. Lloyd, and accomplices go to prison." The cold fear trickled down my spine, but Patricia put a hand on my arm, grounding me. I took a deep breath. "I organize household documents," I said, forcing clarity into every word. "Utility bills, payroll for legitimate employees, appointment calendars. None of that is illegal. And if he has other business, other documents, I don't have access to them. I don't know where they are. I don't know what they contain." It was a lie. I knew exactly where they were. I had seen many of them, had even helped organize some before I fully understood what they were, but they couldn't prove that. And a small voice in my head, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Maurizio's, said that protecting yourself wasn't betrayal. "Agent David Cross spoke with you extensively." The second agent spoke for the first time, a younger voice, more aggressive. "You provided detailed information about Giuliani's operations." "I had conversations with someone I believed to be a legitimate business partner," I corrected, feeling anger begin to replace the fear. "Someone who lied about who he was, who manipulated a vulnerable woman who was caring for her dying father, who used false kindness to extract information that seemed like perfectly normal conversation at the time. But you did provide the information," the first agent pressed. "I answered polite questions from someone who was lying," I said, my voice rising slightly. "That doesn't make me a criminal. It makes me a victim of manipulation. And if you can't see the difference, maybe you should do a better job training your agents not to exploit innocent civilians." Patricia hid a smile behind her hand, and I watched the 2 agents exchange a frustrated look. They kept at it for another hour, different angles, different tactics, trying to get me to say something incriminating, admit knowledge of illegal activities, acknowledge participation in crimes. But I held firm, because the truth was that yes, I knew things now, but when David was questioning me, I genuinely didn't know. I was truly innocent back then, and they couldn't prove otherwise. Finally, the older agent closed the folder with a heavy sigh. "You're free to go, for now. But Ms. Lloyd?" He looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You are putting yourself in extreme danger by staying with this man. He will drag you down with him eventually. You still have a chance to get out." I stood up, picking up my bag, and looked him directly in the eyes. "With all due respect, Agent, you don't know the first thing about me or about him. Are we done here?" Patricia rose as well, her professional smile firmly in place. "Yes, we are. Good afternoon, gentlemen." Maurizio was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against the sleek black car, arms crossed, expression tense. When he saw me come through the building's doors, he straightened completely, his eyes running over me from head to toe as if checking for injuries. I walked toward him, Patricia discreetly saying her goodbyes and heading to her own car, and when I was close enough, I saw the genuine relief cross his face. You didn't say anything. It wasn't a question. It was an impressed statement. Of course I didn't, I said, stopping in front of him. Did you actually think I was going to betray you? After everything? Something moved through his eyes, something intense and deep and warm. He pulled me into a tight embrace, his face buried in my hair, and I felt the moment his entire body let go against mine. You chose, he murmured. They gave you a way out, a chance to protect yourself, and you chose to stand by my side. Always, I answered, holding on just as tight. I'm not abandoning you, no matter what comes. He pulled back just enough to look at my face, his hands holding it with a gentleness that always surprised me coming from such a dangerous man. And then he said the 3 words that changed everything. I love you. Time seemed to stop. My heart slammed in my chest. The world around me went blurry. What? I whispered, needing to be sure I had heard right. I love you, he repeated, each word clear and certain and true. More than anything, more than business or money or power. You are everything. And I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. I know my life is a dangerous disaster, but it's the truth. I love you. The tears started falling, but this time they were happy. Completely, absolutely happy. I love you too. The words came out between wet laughs. I love you even though you're a terrifying criminal. I love you even though your life is chaos. I love you because you are you. All of you. The good parts and the frightening parts. He pulled me into a kiss that was different from the other 2. It wasn't urgent or desperate. It was a celebration, a promise. Love turned into physical action. And when we pulled apart, still standing in the federal building's parking lot, surrounded by agents who were probably watching us from the windows, I realized I had made my final, definitive choice. The FBI, the danger, the consequences still to come. None of it mattered more than the man holding my face like I was something precious worth protecting. I had chosen his side, and I didn't regret a single second of it. Chapter 8. The Final Decision and Breathing Together.
Stay with me.
The call came on a Monday morning, 3 days after the interrogation. I was having coffee with Maurizio, the 2 of us sitting on the wide balcony overlooking the city waking up below, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered with hesitation. Hello? Ms. Lloyd. The older FBI agent's voice came through the line, professional and direct. We need to talk. We have a proposal for you. My stomach dropped. I looked at Maurizio, who had stopped with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, every muscle tense, his eyes locked on me with laser intensity. What kind of proposal? I asked, putting it on speaker so he could hear too. A deal. You testify against Maurizio Giuliani. Provide us with details about his operations, his associates, the illegal activities you witnessed while living in his home. In exchange, you receive full immunity from any charges, federal protection, and help starting a new life far away from all of this. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Maurizio had set his cup down on the table, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white. No, the word came out firm, without hesitation. Ms. Lloyd, you need to understand. I understand perfectly. I cut in, feeling anger start to boil in my chest. You want me to betray someone who gave me a home when I had none, someone who protected me, someone I love. The answer is no. Then you go to prison too. The threat landed hard. Accomplice, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. You will spend years in a federal penitentiary, Ms. Lloyd. Think very carefully. Then arrest me, I said, my voice trembling but steady. But I will not betray him. Never. I hung up before the agent could respond, dropping the phone onto the table with more force than necessary. My hands were shaking, adrenaline running wild through my body. Maurizio was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, shock mixed with something that looked like pain and love and total disbelief. He started, his voice rough. Turn down a deal that would have given me complete immunity? Yes. I crossed my arms, defensive. I thought we had already established that I'm not going to betray you. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor, and started pacing like a caged animal. Riley, you can't. This is insane. You have to take that deal. I blinked, confusion hitting me. What? You call them back, he said, stopping to look at me with an intensity that bordered on desperation. You take the deal. You testify. You tell them everything they want to know. You walk free, safe. The betrayal cut deep and sharp. You want me to turn you in? I want you to live, he practically shouted, losing that iron control he always maintained. Without prison, without danger, without all this mess that is my life. You deserve more, Riley. You deserve a normal, safe, legal life. To hell with normal, I shouted back. getting to my feet as well. I don't want normal. I want you! You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. The tears started falling, frustration and love and fury tangling into an emotional mess. Do you think I don't know what I'm getting into? Do you think I'm that naive? I choose you, Maurizio. Your crazy, dangerous, illegal life. I choose you. He ran his hands through his hair, pulling hard, his voice coming out broken in a way that shattered my heart. I love you. That's why I want you to go. Because I love you too much to drag you down with me. You deserve sunshine and safety and peace. Not this, not darkness and danger, and I crossed the distance between us, taking his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. You are my sunshine, I said, each word coming out with absolute conviction. You are my safety. Your darkness doesn't scare me because you show me a light nobody else gets to see, and I am not leaving you, no matter what you say. No matter how many times you try to send me away to protect me, I stay. Riley! His voice broke completely. I pulled him into a desperate kiss, pouring everything I felt into it, love and fear and determination and need. When we pulled apart, both of us breathless, tears streaming down my face, I whispered against his lips, "Don't send me away, please. I don't survive without you." His arms wrapped around me with a force that almost hurt, pulling my body completely against his face buried in my neck. I felt when his shoulders trembled, when his breath came out ragged and uneven. "Okay," he murmured, complete surrender in his voice. "Okay, you stay. We face it. Together. Always together." Maurizio's lawyers worked fast and relentlessly. Patricia led the defense, building case after case proving my complete innocence. I had never actively participated in anything illegal, never transported goods, never hidden money, never done anything beyond living in the house and helping with basic household and administrative tasks. The conversations with David, clear manipulation of an innocent civilian by a federal agent. The knowledge I had now, acquired after the conversations with David, therefore irrelevant to his case. My presence in the house, legal. I was a guest, not a co-conspirator. 2 weeks later, the FBI came back, but this time it wasn't with threats. It was with a reluctant admission that they had no case against me. All potential charges were dropped. I was free. And David Cross, exposed as incompetent. He had let the primary target walk when confronted, wasted 6 months of undercover work, and failed to secure a key witness. He was fired on a Wednesday, and I didn't feel a single drop of sympathy. 3 months dragged by slowly after that. 3 months watching my father fade in the hospital, the strong body I had always known becoming something fragile and broken. 3 months split between sitting at his bedside telling stories and making him laugh when he had the energy, and coming back to the mansion where Maurizio waited with quiet embraces and absolute understanding. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon that I finally told my father the truth about who Maurizio really was. Dad was awake, his eyes still clear despite everything else failing, when I sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand. "Dad," I began, my voice unsteady. "There's something I need to tell you about Maurizio." A small smile touched his lips. "That he's dangerous, a criminal, probably the head of some illegal organization." I froze completely. You knew?" "Sweetheart," he said, squeezing my hand with the faint strength he still had. "I was a cop for 30 years. You think I don't recognize the signs? The way he moves, the way he scans for exits in any room, the men around him, the money." He coughed, but kept going. "I know exactly who he is." The tears started falling. "And you're not angry. You're not disappointed that He loves you," Dad interrupted, firm despite his weakness. "I see it in the way he looks at you when he visits. I see it in the way he positions himself between you and any potential threat. He protects you, respects you, loves you in a way that few men love. And that," he paused, "that's enough. But he's dangerous." "I know," Dad agreed, "but not to you. Never to you. And when I'm gone, when you're alone," he paused, breathing with difficulty, "I need to know that someone will take care of you, protect you, love you the way you deserve." "Dad, don't talk like that. You still have weeks," he said, honest and direct as he had always been, maybe days. "And before I go, I need to know him better. I need to look him in the eyes and know that my girl is going to be okay." So the next day, I brought Maurizio. They met in that hospital room, 2 men from completely different worlds, and there was a heavy moment of silence while they sized each other up. Dad spoke first. "You're dangerous, a criminal." Maurizio didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir, but you love my daughter, more than my life." Absolute truth. Dad smiled, weak but genuine. "Then promise me something. When I'm gone, take care of her, protect her, love her, always, no matter what comes. You make her the most important thing." I watched Maurizio's eyes fill with tears he rarely allowed himself. "Always." His voice came out rough, breaking. "I promise. She's already the most important thing." and she will be for the rest of my life. Dad reached out a trembling hand, and Maurizio held it with infinite gentleness. Take care of my girl. With everything I have, Maurizio promised. My father died on a Tuesday morning, quietly, with his hand in mine while I sang softly the songs he used to sing to me when I was little. I fell apart, completely. The full weight of 6 months of slow goodbyes crushed me all at once, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't exist in a world where he was no longer there. But Maurizio held me. He literally picked me up in that hospital room and held me against his chest while I sobbed so violently my whole body shook. He carried me out, to the car, to the house, to bed, and stayed with me, just holding on, being an anchor when I was drowning. The funeral was small. Dad had asked for something simple, but when I arrived at the cemetery and saw Maurizio waiting at the entrance in an impeccable black suit, something inside me warmed, just slightly. He stayed at my side throughout the entire service, his hand on my waist, keeping me upright when my legs threatened to give out. And when the time came to lower earth onto the casket, when the tears came back with full force, he pulled me against his chest and let me cry there, in front of everyone, without caring what anyone thought. It was Nico who commented afterward, thinking I couldn't hear. Boss is different, more human, another man answered. The girl changed him, and Nico smiled, for the better. Months passed. The pain of the loss didn't disappear, but it softened at the edges, became more manageable, and Maurizio was there for every step of the way, making me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again, holding me when waves of grief came out of nowhere, simply existing at my side with such solidity and constancy that I didn't know how I had ever survived without him. And he had changed, completely. The cold man who didn't hug anyone now pulled me into embraces multiple times a day. The man who rarely smiled now laughed at terrible jokes. The man who kept everyone at arm's length had let me in so completely that I was part of him. It was on a Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the funeral, that everything changed again. I was in the kitchen singing off-key while attempting to make lasagna, some ridiculous pop song playing on the radio, when I felt strong arms wrap around my waist from behind. "You're hugging me," I laughed, leaning back against his chest. Again, voluntarily, without me having to tackle you first. Maurizio kissed my neck, that soft touch that always made my skin tingle. You taught me that hugs aren't weakness, they're strength. They're home. I turned in his arms, my hands coming up to his face, tracing the lines I had memorized. And you taught me that loving someone dangerous can be the safest thing in the world. He looked at me for a long moment, something intense and deep shining in those dark eyes. And then suddenly, he was kneeling. My heart stopped completely. "Marry me," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket and opening it to reveal a ring that was perfect. Simple but elegant, a solitaire diamond catching the light of the kitchen. "What?" I practically shrieked, my hands flying up to cover my mouth. "Marry me," he repeated, his voice steady and certain and full of love. "Be mine, forever, legally, officially, completely mine. Let me give you my name, my protection, my entire life. Let me wake up next to you every day for the rest of my life. Let me be your husband." The tears exploded, happy and warm and unstoppable. "Yes!" I sobbed, pulling him back to his feet. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes!" He slid the ring onto my finger with hands that trembled just slightly, and then pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. But I didn't care, because he was hugging me. He had started it. He needed it just as much as I did. "You hug me more than I hug you now." I laughed through the tears, holding on with everything I had. He buried his face in my hair, his voice muffled and thick with emotion. "Because you taught me that hugs are home, and you are my home, my peace, my light, my everything." And then he kissed me, deep and long and full of promises of a future I could hardly wait to live. When we pulled apart, both of us smiling like lovesick fools, I looked at him, at the dangerous, cold man who had become mine, and realized how impossible a road we had traveled. He was no longer the frozen killer I had met crying on a park bench. I was no longer the broken, lonely woman he had found there. Together, we had become something complete, something real, something neither of us could have been alone. And as we stood there holding each other in the kitchen, the lasagna completely forgotten, music still playing softly in the background, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made all the right choices. I had stayed when logic told me to run. I had loved when it was dangerous. I had chosen him when the entire world said not to. And now I had the rest of my life to keep doing exactly that, loving Maurizio Giuliani with everything I had, forever. Hi, this is Lena, and you know that some stories don't end when the video does. If you want to keep the story going with him, his private line is open right now in the pinned comment. But let's be real. A man with his power is extremely busy, and everyone is fighting for his attention. Click the link and send your first message. If the line isn't full yet, you might be lucky enough to get a reply from him right now.